TFA Fam, what is going on? I hope you're all doing well. It is week 15. It is the semifinals for most of you, should be all of you, but that's another topic for a different show. We're going to jump right into the week 15 running back rankings to help you get to that ship, get to the championship, and bring home that dub, bring home that fat stack of cash, if you will. Before we jump into it, please be sure to hit that subscribe button if you are not yet subscribed. We're giving away a super sick, super authentic Allen Robinson signed jersey. We're going to do a couple t-shirt giveaways as well. So please be sure to subscribe. That's basically how we're going to base this off the YouTube subscribers. So you guys have been awesome to us all year. So we want to give back. It is a season of giving. It is Kev's favorite time of year. So we want to give back to the TFA fam who has been so awesome to us. So if you're unfamiliar how these shows are going to go, Kev's rankings are now up on the screen. He's going to go through his rankings. I'm going to kind of go off of the Fantasy Pros consensus rankings just to give a little bit of a balance to this. And then we're going to chop it up and talk about a couple of these guys who we think are interesting on the week. So without further ado, Kev's RB1 rankings for week 15 are as follows. Derrick Henry at 1, Aaron Jones, Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler, Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb at 6, Jonathan Taylor, David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, James Robinson at 10, Chris Carson, and then Cam Akers, the man that everybody is loving right now, comes in at the final RB1 spot. Kev, why don't you talk to the folks and let them know who you're digging this week and who you think is an interesting RB1 option.
Yes, start off really quickly. I just want to say Alvin Kamara, it was nice to see him bounce back last week, where I think some of it we got a little carried away with his usage, especially his target share, with the fact that the Saints pretty much steamrolled the first few weeks that he was starting. And then once they actually fell behind and actually had to throw the ball, is when all of a sudden they started to decide to use Alvin Kamara as a pass catcher again. So I think whether Taysom Hill or Drew Brees starts. Obviously, Drew Brees is better for Alvin Kamara, but I still think we found that they're going to have to utilize him, and Alvin Kamara is at a great spot. The Chiefs have been terrible against the run, so Alvin Kamara, whether it's Taysom Hill, whether it's Drew Brees, I think is at a great spot. He saw 10 targets last week, but I just wanted to mention that really quick because I know people were kind of nervous about him. But let's start with I'm going to start with Austin Eckler, which again, very obvious play, but I just kind of wanted to wax poetically on how well he has played especially recently since coming back from injury. He is RB5 for the last 3 weeks. It's returning. He leads all running backs in targets with 29. It's not even close. The next closest only has 16 targets, which he had that in one game. He's averaging nearly 10 targets per game and 10 rushes per game while playing roughly 65% of the snaps. He's averaging the 5th most fantasy points. He's returning at a clip of 19.4. And this week they get the Raiders, who the Raiders are fucking awful. And they just fired their defensive coordinator, Paul Gunther, this week, who is just as horrible. And they currently allow the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs, as well as tied for the most rushing yards, or the most rushing touchdowns at 10th most receptions on the season. So all good, great things for Austin Eckler. So you are starting Austin Eckler with absolute confidence this week. They play Thursday night against the Raiders. I know there was a little bit of concern about possibly an injury, but it sounds like he is good to go. He should be fine. The next guy I want to talk about who's also questionable heading into this Thursday night game is Josh Jacobs on the other side of the football with a little bit of an ankle. We'll have to see there. If not, I do think Devontae Booker is a viable play in a pinch if you absolutely had to. I would say, drop a comment in the comment section below. If that is something that happens, if you're watching this on a Thursday and kind of wondering who you should go with, because we'll talk about why you want to play running backs against the Chargers. But I digress. Let's take a look at Josh Jacobs. He's going to look to get back on track this week after barely finishing his RB2 in Week 14 against the Colts. Jacobs scored 10.4 PPR points with 49 rushing yards on 13 carries and 3 receptions on 5 targets for 25 yards. He also played a season-low 42% of the snaps, but some of that is basically because they were just getting their shit kicked out of them, and there was no reason to really keep running Jacobs out there at that point. Jacobs currently sits 3rd in evaded tackles and 8th in yards created on the season. However, one thing that's kind of evident is that he just hasn't been as efficient with a 3.7 true yard per carry, which is 53rd among all running backs. So it's not been a great year for Josh Jacobs. I think he's been serviceable, but he's had some really big weeks, but he's had a lot of just kind of very mediocre weeks. But some of it's been due to their schedule. They've had a lot of terrible, matchups this year. The Colts wasn't a good one. But regardless of that, they do take on the Chargers on Thursday night. The Chargers currently ranked 27th in adjusted line yards, 24th in open, and 29th in second level, and currently ranked 31st in rush DVOA. This is really kind of a ceiling game for Josh Jacobs. I could see Josh Jacobs smashing this one because if they can keep it close or get a lead, that is when the Raiders really lean on Josh Jacobs. So I do think as long as Josh Jacobs play, which sounds like he can, because they absolutely need him to play, because if they lose, their season's over. Basically with one loss, because it's really looking bleak right now. But if they win out, they still have a shot. But right now, that's definitely what they need is to win out, and they definitely are going to need Josh Jacobs to do it. However, if they do miss, I think Devontae Booker makes for a decent RB3. So if you're in that position, drop it in the comment section below. We can talk about maybe who you would consider starting him over if you wanted to do so. Moving on, let's talk about Cam Akers.
Let's do it. I want to hear it.
So there's going to be a couple different narratives with Cam Akers this week. One, obviously Cam Akers the last 2 weeks has looked fantastic, right? However, there's going to be some people that say this isn't a very good matchup. And on paper, I would probably agree. However, there are some things here that I do want to talk about. So, like I said, he looks to stay hot against the Jets this week. Akers is coming off his best game as a pro with 194 total yards, but he also failed to find the end zone despite getting multiple opportunities, a lot like we saw with Clyde Edwards-Helaire earlier in the year. But we have seen him be able to do it in previous games, so it's not really an issue that I'm really concerned about. But we have seen the snap share rise each of the last 2 weeks with 65% and then 82% last week. He's also starting to run more routes, at least averaging about 20 per game. As long as McFay doesn't do anything stupid, Akers could end up being a league winner in the final few weeks. Like I mentioned, this week the Rams take on the Jets this week, who are 7th in rush DVOA and have only allowed one 100-yard rusher on the entire season. They currently sit 4th in adjusted line yard, which is really good, but they are 29th in open field yards, meaning that if he can get past the defensive line, he is going to break off some monster gains. They are terrible at tackling. They've missed the most tackles on the entire season. So that's why you see such a high open field and second level rank, because if you're able to bust through that defensive line, it is wheels up for you. And the Rams offensive line has been really good this year. So I think there's some intriguing things there. I also believe that one of the reasons why we're seeing the Jets defense as 7th in rush DVOA is because the teams just want to hammer the ball or pass the ball on them, because you can throw all over them. We saw teams like the Chiefs completely abandon the runs against them. Multiple teams have just chose to just throw it all over them instead of really opening it up. But if we saw last week, Seattle, Chris Carson only had 12 attempts at 76 yards. Carlos Hyde, 13 carries, 66 yards. So you can certainly run on this team. And so I do think Cam Akers does make for a really interesting RB1. And while I don't think that he may not have 25, 30 carries again this week like he did last week, I still think he can get there off efficiency and finding the end zone. So I like Cam Akers quite a bit this week. We told people for like 3 or 4 weeks, I believe, every single waiver show, pick up Cam Akers, pick up Cam Akers, pick up Cam Akers. And now here we are. He looks like he's going to win people's league. So that's all I got to say about my RB1.
I can verify. I was there for that. I was here, and we certainly were telling people to pick up Cam Akers. We thought that this was going to be happening a lot sooner this year, but it's happening now. Good things come to those who wait. I just want to touch on a couple of guys real quick. First, I'm happy to see you finally give Jonathan Taylor some respect and put him up here in your RB1 rankings. You've come a long way, Kev. I'm proud of you, buddy. 2, how dare you have Josh Jacobs, the fantasy community troll, in your RB1 rankings? This guy coming out telling people he's not going to play, getting the fantasy community in a goddamn frenzy on Sunday, just a couple of hours before kickoff. So I think that's just disrespectful, and you were rubbing it in our faces. But I digress. The guy who I do want to touch on real quickly, Jonathan Taylor. Talked about him last week. Not going to spend a lot of time on him. If you have him, you're playing him. I would not be surprised to see him finish as a top 5 back this week. Houston's giving up the most rushing yards. They're tied for the most rushing touchdowns. They've given up the 4th most receiving yards, despite being in the middle of the pack in receptions. Taylor's broken the 4th most tackles on the ground in the last 3 weeks, as well as being 4th in breakaway percentage. And I think PFF defines that as like 15-plus yards on runs. He's averaging 18 rush attempts and 110 yards over those last 3 weeks. And, we were talking about him a little bit last week, and he went from like 56% snaps 3 games ago down to 48, but that percentage jumped back up to 56 in week 14. So I think all systems are a go for Jonathan Taylor. Hopefully you held on to him throughout the bad times, and now you're reaping the benefits. And the other one to touch on, Mike Davis, he is sitting in the Fantasy Pros consensus rankings at running back 9. It sounds like that McCaffrey is not going to play again this week, which is just such a bummer for those who held on to him. Or I know one of the people who consistently engage with us on YouTube and Twitter, Karn, I know he traded for him a couple of weeks ago, and I kind of helped guide that trade. But anyway, Mike Davis gets the Swiss cheese Packers defense, giving up the 4th most fantasy points per game to running backs. The Packers have given up 9 RB1 games this year. So, and even if the Packers lead this entire game, which is obviously well within the range of outcomes, Davis is going to be involved in the passing game. He's seen fewer than 5 targets just 3 times all year. So I think you can confidently fire up Mike Davis as well going into this week, in a week where running back is even thinner than usual. And we'll move things on to the RB2s here to kind of keep things chugging along. Kicking things off at RB13 for Kev, Miles Sanders, followed by J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, Ronald Jones, James Conner, Mike Davis, Wayne Gallman, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Kareem Hunt, Zeke, Kenyon Drake, and then Melvin Gordon rounding things out at RB24. Kev, go ahead and touch on a couple of these guys, and then we'll keep things moving along.
Yeah, I really just want to talk about Miles Sanders here. So you look at Miles Sanders, and we talked about this last week. He was somebody that I really kind of highlighted last week whenever we were going through going through this, and somebody that I felt like that. I'm sure a lot of people benched him last week, right? Because he just they were terrible, and he wasn't really doing a whole lot. He hadn't scored more than 9 fantasy points since I think it was week 10 prior to last week, and he goes out and has his best game of the season, and that's fantasy football for you. But like I said, he's coming off where he racked up 136 total yards, 2 touchdowns, 29.6 fantasy points. And I know I've seen a lot of people say, yeah, well, if you take away that 80-yard touchdown, I'm like, dude, it is like the worst logic sometimes, because I'm like, yeah, but you can't, because it happened, right? Like, we don't do that like with all these other dudes. Like, do we do that and go through and like, yeah, well, Derrick Henry didn't have like all those 2 or 3 long rushing touchdowns this year, or if Ronald Jones didn't have that 98, like, it happened, it counted, it's fantasy points. Who cares how it happens? Like, I get some of the argument with like efficiency and stuff like that, but regardless of that's his ceiling. Like, that's what he's capable of doing. We've seen him do it multiple times this year where he's broken off long touchdown runs. Like, that's in his range of outcomes, and those are the reasons why. And the play set up so perfectly that it happened on, because it's exactly what we talked about, like on the Game Day show and prior to, was Jalen Hurts, his running ability. Even though Carson Wentz is a mobile quarterback, he does not have the same type of athleticism that Jalen Hurts brings to the table. So those RPOs do wonders for a running back, because defenses can't just, I know you're handing it off to this guy, we're going to load the box and we're just going to come straight after you, and you're going to get hit in the backfield. You can't do that with a quarterback like that, who can pull it out and bust off a 40-yard run on you, right? And so that's exactly what happened. The defense focused on Jalen Hurts. He gave it to Miles Sanders, and Miles Sanders was gone. 80-yard touchdowns at the house, and that's exactly what's going to be happening. So it really opens up the running lane for guys like Miles Sanders. Now, Miles Sanders this week, they do take on a Cardinals defense who has been decent. They have struggled to stop the run at times, allow the 14th most fantasy points to the position, and sit 17th in adjusted line yards. And have had real issues in the second levels. They're 24th at open and second level yards. So for me, I think Miles Sanders is a high-end RB2, but he has top 5 upside like we just saw last week. So I like Miles Sanders. They used him more in the passing game as well. He played 80% of the snaps last week as well. So there's a lot to like with Miles Sanders. And I think Jalen Hurts really helps out Miles Sanders. And I think, while I don't view him as a lock RB1 like I did earlier in the year, this dude is legitimately one of the best running backs in all of football. And I think, with a guy like Jalen Hurts is now really helping Miles Sanders. So Hopefully this continues because we need it. And this isn't a terrible matchup against the Cardinals. I think this game against the Cardinals is going to be one of the more fun games to watch on the weekend. So I do like Miles Sanders, and I think it's a guy you can fire up with confidence this week.
The guys that I want to touch on real quick before we move on to the RB3s, J.K. Dobbins. First of all, that game on Monday night was so much fun to watch. That like so many different storylines going on. That was just such an awesome game if you got to watch that full thing. What was not fun was Gus Edwards vulturing 2 scores for, I guess not vulturing, but the fact that Gus Edwards only had 7 carries on the night and he scored twice. That is shitty if you were starting J.K. Dobbins. But on the positive side, Dobbins has had 60% or more of the running back snaps in his last 2 to 3 games. He did miss that one game because of the COVID. And he has 39 of the rush attempts for the Baltimore backfield compared to a combined 27 for all of the other Baltimore running backs. So Justice Hill has had a couple, obviously Mark Ingram, and then Gus Edwards as well. So Dobbins has also had double-digit fantasy points in each of his last 3 games. And now he gets Jacksonville, who's giving up the 5th most fantasy points to running backs on the season. So I think if you have Dobbins, you can confidently start him as your RB2 or hopefully even your flex if you're set up that well at running back position. And then the last one I want to touch on real quick is just is Jeff Wilson. I think could have an RB2 week because even if Raheem Mostert plays, he went for an MRI today, which just the fact that he's going to get one can't be a good sign. So even if he does suit up, I think we see Wilson take 65, 70, 75% of this work in this backfield compared to over the past 2 weeks. They've essentially formed a 2-back committee with both of them basically getting like 48 and 49% of the snaps over the last 2 weeks. And the other 49ers running backs, McKinnon and Coleman, have combined for 8 offensive snaps over the last 2 weeks. We were always afraid this is going to be a 3-headed monster. Well, now it looks like it's down to 2. And with Raheem Mostert looking questionable at best, I think we can see Wilson get the lion's share of these snaps. And going up against the Cowboys, we know how bad the Cowboys defense has been, giving up the 6th most fantasy points per game to running backs. And as of right now, we're recording this on Tuesday night, and Wilson is available in 85% of ESPN leagues. So if you happen to catch this, Wednesday morning before your waivers run, go out, grab Wilson. I think you can plug and play him depending on your RB situation. So he's someone who I think could absolutely give us a better outcome than we are expecting. So let's go ahead and move things on to the RB3s and finish this out. Kicking things off at RB25, that is David Johnson, followed by DeAndre Washington, Raheem Mostert, J.D. McKissick, Nyheim Hines, Devin Singletary, Damian Harris, Lynn Bowden, Peyton Barber, Giovanni Bernard, Jeff Wilson, and Latavius Murray. I just want to touch on Lynn Bowden real quick, and then, Kev, I'll give you the floor. Bowden is someone who is definitely interesting because in both ESPN and Yahoo leagues, he has the RB wide receiver eligibility. So with, Parker going out of the game last week, Jakeem Grant going out of the game, Gesicki going out of the game, this might turn into the Lynn Bowden show. So I think if you can go out and snag him, I think he's definitely worth at least a stash. If you don't feel comfortable playing this week, I totally get it. Kev, why don't you go ahead and touch on a couple of these RB3s if you so desire, and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, first thing I wanted to mention that I forgot to mention when we were talking about RB2 is we have to monitor Ronald Jones this week because he had surgery today to put a pin in his pinky that I guess he broke. So Ronald Jones possibly may not play this week. We'll have to wait and see. It sounds very similar to what Chris Godwin had, and Chris Godwin was able to play through it. Obviously, running back's a little bit more of a physical position, but we will see. I have to monitor that one because we could be staring down the barrel of Leonard Fournette, depending on what happens with him. But hey, Keyshawn Vaughn could be a thing. this week. I doubt it, but we'll wait and see. We'll
monitor. I'm here for it.
And the first guy I want to talk about is DeAndre Washington. We'll have to really monitor, see what's going on with Myles Gaskin. I do not believe at the time of recording this that they have activated him from COVID. He was put on the reserve, and I think it might be a little bit too late for that to happen. Salvon Ahmed could come back, but DeAndre Washington wasn't terrible last week. He wasn't great either. He carried the ball 13 times for 35 yards. Obviously not good. He also hauled in two of his 4 targets, 17 yards. It really was a situation where the Dolphins really fell pretty quickly behind for the most part. At least, once you got past the first quarter, they were down 30-10. They really didn't need to run the ball anymore, and they were trying to throw the ball. So it kind of limited what DeAndre Washington was able to do. But this week, the Dolphins take on a Patriots defense that's been terrible against the run. They are 25th in adjusted line yards, 30th in power, 24th in second level, and they're 27th in rush DVOA. This is the same defense that we talked about last week, why we wanted to play Cam Akers, why Cam Akers was a smash spot, why we had Cam Akers higher than everybody else had him. Was that an exact reason that this Patriots run defense is absolutely atrocious? And this is probably much better scenario where this game stays a little bit more closer. And, you can see DeAndre Washington, as long as Myles Gaskin is out, if we get that word. I also think if we find out that Salvon Ahmed returns and he's going to take over as the lead back, I think he's probably somebody that's probably pretty widely available as well because of all the stuff that's happened, him being out, Myles Gaskin returning, all this stuff. If he's available in your league as well, I think either one of these guys are decent options against the Patriots this week. The other guy I want to talk about is just J.D. McKissic. He's basically their number 2 wide receiver, even though they have him listed at running back. He has 82 targets on the season, which is the second highest in the league. He also is second in receptions with 58. As long as Washington football team are trailing and Alex Smith is able to return, he should see his usual 10-plus targets this week against Seattle, who I highly anticipate Seattle being able to lead this ball game. So they should be playing from behind, which is great news for J.D. McKissic. So I think J.D. McKissic should be started if you own him. I mean, it depends on who you have, but more often than not, you're probably going to want to play him. You can play him as a low-end RB2 or flex option because the dude just being peppered with targets. So he doesn't have a high floor or a high ceiling in terms of like touchdowns and all that stuff because some of this is not probably going to score. But anytime they're trailing, this dude's just going to get hammered with targets. And in PPR formats, it's great. Standard, you can completely ignore him. But in PPR formats, I think he makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm much more interested with McKissic now that it looks like they have not ruled out Alex Smith. When I thought it was Haskins who was going to be starting, I was a little lower on him. But after I saw the news that they're hopeful that Smith is going to start, I like McKissic a lot more this week. So that's going to wrap things up for the running back rankings for week 15. Don't forget, if you want your shot to win this Allen Robinson signed jersey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We appreciate all you guys, and good luck in week 15.